B25-259, the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act. While ASWB is actively engaged in efforts to advance the social work profession, supports addressing workforce shortages, we cannot support provisions that threaten to set back the profession by decades, lowering entry to practice professional standards through the removal of licensing exams. Instead, we want to work together to improve the systems and institutions that make the road to the exams so much harder for some than for others. Our board invested in an analysis and published pass rate outcomes to face these systemic issues head on. We take the firm position that social work is a profession, and historically social work has had to fight for its status as a profession, often having its credibility diminished by those who, without knowledge and training, are quick to claim that they're like a social worker. But true professions come with uniform standards, including examinations that assure consumer confidence, offer accountability, and uphold the public's trust. Continuously vetted and monitored professional standards also provide assurances to clients that they can rely on what they're getting when they're working with someone called a licensed social worker at all levels of service. We want and even demand that the doctors and nurses, OTs and PTs that treat us prove that they have knowledge and the skill set required to practice. In fact, all healthcare professions require a test of entry-level competence. So I have to ask you to not treat social workers as less than other professionals. We believe workforce is the right issue, but the exams are the wrong target. We applaud the bill's intent to get more social workers in positions to serve the public. However, diminishing the professional standards of our field is not the right path forward. Social workers tend to serve the most vulnerable among us. So a license to practice is a serious matter with vast implications and far-reaching consequences. Removal of examinations from the DC Board of Social Work's licensure decision-making process is a move that detracts from addressing the more upstream, collaborative work we need to do as a community to face complex systemic problems such as anti-Blackism. Rather than reducing entry to practice standards, we ask this committee to consider broader workforce issues and alternatives, as have been proposed for other professions. So for social workers, that is about compensating them commensurate with their education and experience, looking at the working conditions and managing caseloads, tuition assistance, and pay equity. We stand by the practicing, let me repeat that, practicing social workers who assure exam fairness. Practicing social workers drive exam development and represent a demographic cross-section of our profession. It is our social work colleagues who work hard to assure robust anti-bias measures are followed that surpass anything anywhere else. The social work licensing exams also involve intense third-party psychometric processes that monitor the fairness of each and every test question. Last year, we were the first and remain the only Health or Human Service Association to publish a national disaggregated pass rate analysis. It revealed disparities in outcomes for demographics like age and race, as you've heard before, but it's critically important not to conflate outcomes with origins. This did not start with the test. Candidates do not come to licensure with the same experiences, the same access to tutoring, the same access to resources or other opportunities. And that's the issue we need to unite around. Finally, we encourage the district to not act prematurely. You can avoid some of the unintended consequences emerging in other jurisdictions, such as impacts on the district's federally employed social workers, such as the VA, which is the largest employer of social workers, and the military social workers. This bill is not the answer. We respectfully ask that you take the time to convene the task force proposed so that you can make data and practice-informed decisions. ASWB supports our DC board members' participation on the proposed task force and offers to serve as a member or simply as a resource to members so that they can have the accurate information if approved by this council toward a more positive, longer lasting impact on the profession's workforce and those social workers serve. Thank you very much, and I cannot wait to answer some of your questions.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yes, hello. My name is Michelle May. I'm the Executive Director of Deaf Reach, a small nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. We are one of the few agencies across the country who provides services exclusively to deaf and hard of hearing people and whose staff is almost exclusively deaf and hard of hearing as well. We provide behavioral health services, interpreting, and a variety of levels of housing, and have been available for over 50 years. I'm here today as a DC licensed independent clinical social worker and a DC resident, and I do support the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. I feel strongly through my experiences that Washington, DC social workers should not be required to pass an exam to become licensed to begin their supervised practice in social work. Deaf Reach works closely with Gallaudet University, the only university in the world focusing on the training of social workers who are deaf and hard of hearing. Master's and bachelor students in social work come to Deaf Reach for clinical internships. And in fact, we are one of the few settings in DC in which deaf and hard of hearing social work students have an opportunity to gain a clinical experience with deaf and hard of hearing clients with mental health issues. Even though Gallaudet University is here in our midst in Washington, DC, most graduates of the program are unable to pass the licensure test, which does not fairly measure the ability of a deaf clinician to help deaf people, nor is it written in deaf-friendly language. In fact, the written words of the test are frequently in direct conflict with the conceptual language of sign, which is what we use in practice. It is a travesty that this wonderful, diverse international group of budding social work professionals are not able to thrive in the District of Columbia, which seemingly supports and commits to diversity. The result of this testing requirement is that deaf and hard of hearing individuals experiencing mental health issues or other social concerns in the district are going without care from clinicians who share their background, culture, and language. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Adam.
Good afternoon, Chairman Henderson, Councilmember White, and Council staff. My name is Adam Mayer. I'm a native Ward 6 Washingtonian, a member of the district's Commission on Human Rights, and the Director of Housing Partnerships at Pathways to Housing. I want to begin by thanking you for conducting this hearing to help resolve a rather absurd dilemma confronting the provision of social work services within our city, and I hope soon within our state. A very strong case has been made today for the passage of the legislation. The social work exam has nothing to do with ethical practice, public safety, or preparing a person to be a qualified social worker. At Pathways, as you heard, 85 unlicensed social workers applied for case manager positions. 85 applications received, yet none from a licensed social worker. 85 applications from people who had either undergraduate or graduate social work degrees, yet none had passed a clearly worthless and documented racist test that is currently required by my government. The social work reform legislation was introduced by Councilmember White, co-sponsored by 9 council members. If passed, these exams will no longer keep competent social workers from doing vital work with vulnerable Washington residents. We in DC are in a mental health crisis and a workforce shortage. We immediately need licensed, competent social workers. As I mentioned, I'm an appointed member of the District Commission on Human Rights. I am testifying not as a commission representative, but as an individual member of the commission. I must say that the council can resolve this biased, racist licensure examination rather easily and quickly. As a former council committee director, I have observed hundreds of emergency measures passed by this council. The issue of social work licensure is by far an emergency measure that is hindering the ability of our provider community to hire social workers, as it is denying social work services to our vulnerable community. I urge you to move this legislation as an emergency measure at the October meeting of the full council. Please remove this harmful and needless barrier to working as a social worker. Allow Pathways and other providers to call back the people that have applied, in our case, 85, so that they can have an interview for these positions in October and November. Defer to us, the provider community, the ability to hire, train, and supervise the social workers that we need on our staff. We stand ready to help your staff in drafting the emergency resolution and emergency legislation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you to all of the witnesses on this panel. I'm just going to go ahead. I know I'm going to go over my time. I know that. So I'm going to be proactive and say, let's do a 7-minute round, and hopefully way that I'll stay within that time. I'm going to start with Ms. Hardy Chandler. Good to see you again. As your organization has been the source of much of the conversation here, I was hoping that you might be able to start us off with sort of grounding in some data around what the rates of passing and failing the examination currently look like for people who have taken it in the district.
So I don't have the specific district information. We do have that information sheet that we provided your office, and we will follow that up with some specific numbers, but we can get that information for you. We do have that breakdown by each and every jurisdiction. We have the breakdown by each and every social work program. So we do have that information available.
Okay. And can you just take us back and sort of talk a little bit about the impetus of why the exam was even introduced? Some of the earlier, I got into a conversation with some of the earlier panelists around the differences between ASWB versus, say, the Council of Social Work Education in terms of the role that they have around saying someone has mastered curriculum, et cetera. But if the exam was only required starting in 1999? No, 4? When did you start requiring this exam? Or when did they? 93. 83. Oh, okay. 83. So what was the impetus for the exam in 83?
So one of the things that has not come up in the testimony is the voice of the regulators and their responsibility. So the public charges regulators with sort of vetting professionals, and for the Board of Social Work, they need an array of tools at their disposal to make very important decisions. So I think we've been talking about this as an either or. Regulation and the exam is not counter to education. That's factored into that decision. Experience is not seen as, it's the exam or supervision. Supervision, if required by a level of licensure, is included in that decision. And another factor, of course, is an objective measure of competence. And so these tools together round out this very important decision for the boards to make regarding granting licenses and decisions around how people maintain competence over the course of their career. The other part of it is, I speak to the CEO of CSWE. I speak to the CEO of NASW, and I actually am a member of NASW. So there are conversations about looking across the system in ways that we have not done before. But I think it's important to see this from the regulator standpoint, and their responsibility is to be accountable to the public.
Are there other things that the association is doing to try to improve knowledge of the exam, preparation for the exam? Otherwise, there was an earlier witness who testified that the practice to get a practice exam is $85, which, you know, okay. If I wanted to get a practice exam of the SAT, I could just go to the College Board website and download one without having to pre-register to actually take the exam. Are there other ways that you all can sort of reduce barriers or are working to reduce barriers on the examination front?
So absolutely, there's a number of initiatives in place. And by the way, the practice exam is one resource available. There are a suite of other resources that are available for free. They're directed toward educators, but anyone can access those. And so there's accurate information we absolutely want to get out to the public so that they're prepared. In addition, I think, can I back up and just say that it's concerning to me that we're targeting the exam, like I said, to the exclusion of other factors. And this is sort of a simplistic example, so forgive me for using such simplicity, but for example, Black and Indigenous people have extremely high blood pressure. And no one is saying, oh, that racist blood pressure cuff. We know that there are social determinants of health that people bring to the clinic that pick up on these results. The exam is a tool just like that, and I certainly invite everyone who has testified to go to the webinars that we're providing about exam development, the webinars we provided about the psychometrics and about exam administration and the accommodations that are available. And a lot of the themes that you've heard, if you've listened very closely, more time. ASWB was providing accommodations well before the ADA. And so one of the things that we do is really focus on accessibility and those kinds of things. So I think it's really important to, first of all, acknowledge what we have, but standards require that we continuously evolve competence measures. So right now, it looks like a multiple choice test, but in the future, based on research and validity, the competence measurement process can look very different, but we have to do that in a way that allows us to answer to the public to say that this is reliable, this is valid, and we have to do that with intentionality. So we're not stuck to this. What we have a responsibility to do is provide competence measurement.
Okay. What would you say, though, to the witnesses who had testified earlier today, and even some of the folks on the panel, that unlike other professions, given the requirement of extensive supervision hours, many of which people have to pay for, is an exam truly necessary, given
Take your time. So maybe I can start to answer that question. So first of all of those pieces matter. We don't reject any part of a whole decision because licensure decisions are so important. So all of those things matter. But when a person, and I have been a former field director for social work education, and that is a very important experience to get a person to a level of competence for graduation. What we're talking about here is entry to practice, where practicing social workers have been asked, what do people on day one of their job, just across the board, need to know as a core part of practice? Not specialization, not specific populations, but what does the average social worker need to know? And that information does not come from ASWB. It comes from social workers who are working in the field, our colleagues. So I would say, I believe your question is going in the direction of, education covers a piece, the exam covers a piece, supervision covers a piece, and all of those pieces together allow regulators to make sounder decisions. I learned as a social worker, you don't make a decision based on a single point of data, that you need to know more holistically in order to make the best possible decision. Now, is it perfect? No, but it's a process that allows regulators more information so that they can make better decisions. So it contributes something different. Supervision contributes a part, but graduation, I fully agree that for the most part, accredited programs allow people to be competent up to the point of graduation. But again, regulators are responsible for practitioners 20, 30, throughout the rest of their career. Regulators have to answer for that. And so having a say on those licensure decisions are really important. And schools are not responsible for practitioners after they graduate. The regulators are. And so it's really important, again, for us to work as a community.
Okay, I tried to stay within my time. I'm over it. Councilmember
I'm
White.
sorry.
No, it's okay. That was partly my fault. Excuse me. Go ahead, Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairperson Henderson. And thank you so much for this panel of witnesses. Stacey Hardy Chandler, thank you for being with us and sharing this perspective. I understand your testimony concern about lowering the professional standard in the test, giving credibility, and you were discussing that the exam is one part of ensuring minimum competence for social workers. And that's sort of where I want to start is understanding what role the exam plays in determining minimum competence. What data do you have that correlate passing the exam with being a good social worker?
So I am looking forward to that question because we have to talk about what competence is for licensing. So this is based on practice. So the criteria competence based on what practitioners are saying, what the field says is important to have. That's the competence by which our tests are valid and all licensure tests. So when the question is about predictive efforts, no licensure exam, not for doctors, not for nurses, not for social workers, predicts future violations or future behavior. That predictive nature is not a part of what licensure exams do. We measure competence against what practitioners are saying should be day one competence. So that question about data about competence later on or what people are going to do, no licensing exam intends to do that. And that's always going to be, there's no data there because that's not what this license exam is based on. It's based on what those in the field say are priority knowledge areas on day one of practice in any setting.
Okay, so if people in the field are saying these are the core competencies, what data do you have on the correlation between people showing that they understand those core competencies through their test results and how they end up doing in the practice of social work?
But again, the end up doing is the predictive piece that licensure exams do not measure. So I cannot say anything about what people will end up doing because those of us who support boards, social workers, doctors, nurses, every profession, what people end up doing is not what that exam is validated against. It's validated against criterion, and those criterion are defined by practitioners. So there is nothing there for that predictive or what people will end up doing or future. And I think that's an important piece because it's couched as if, well, there's no data out there that says it's not what the test is meant to do. So if you're holding the test against a criterion that it's not even meant to do, or that it's not validated against, then of course the answer is going to be no. But it's the practitioners who develop the blueprint, the practitioners who write the items, the practitioners who lead the practice analysis task force. Those are the people that we stand behind that know this profession.
So then how do you measure or self-evaluate the effectiveness of the exam?
The effectiveness of the exam is within the context of the whole decision. So I think that it's not a component on its own. Regulators are taking that into consideration along with background checks, along with their educational experience, along with their supervision. And so that's part of a comprehensive whole. So that has to do with how those decisions are turning out at the board level. But the exam is valid in what it contributes to that overarching equation.
So ASWB administers the exam as part of an entrance criteria for licensing for social workers. But what I'm hearing from your testimony is that you don't have a way to evaluate its precision or effectiveness. So I don't understand how you sort of check your work on this.
So we do evaluate it constantly. We evaluate elements of the exam. We evaluate the exam process in alignment with professional standards for licensure. We have third-party psychometricians who do that on an ongoing basis. But I think it's the mistaken premise that it's supposed to have some sort of predictive power is not a part of that process. So validation happens. Testing of reliability happens on an ongoing basis. You have to do that as part of adhering to testing standards. So I'm certainly willing to follow up with that with our psychometricians, but that's done by third-party people that focus on that, and that's what they do, is evaluate the validity of this test. So that
How do
happens.
they evaluate it? I
So
understand who evaluates it, but still not how they evaluate it.
So maybe that is the psychometric part that is beyond what I can share with you now. I am not a psychometrician. I rely on the experts for some of that specific, but I would be happy to follow up with you in a more specific and detailed discussion about that.
Right. I'm concerned here because your testimony suggested that the test measures entry-level competence and that getting rid of it would lower the professional standard, but we haven't been able to establish how you measure whether it measures the professional standard in the first place.
It does measure the standard against the criteria identified by practitioners. So, council member, you can see a document that's the practice analysis that was done in 2017. That's available online. We're going to start a new practice analysis in 2024. That criteria is available to the public. Take a look at that. And what we are monitoring is alignment of those individual items, the whole testing process with that practice analysis blueprint. So that document is out there and available.
Okay. So there are people across the nation, practicing social workers who are grandfathered in before the test was required for licensure, and there are practitioners, social workers practicing in states that don't require tests for licensures for LSWA and LGW. Is there any statistically significant increase in citations and enforcement against social workers in states where there's an alternative pathway to licensure, or folks who have been grandfathered in, compared to people who have passed the test to become licensed social workers?
Now, that data does not exist, and quite frankly, there has been very little substantive research in regulation, which is why ASWB put out an RFP earlier this year to start to partner with educators who are researchers to better contextualize some of these questions. So that kind of research has not been done. Regulation really has been a neglected area in terms of research, and that's why we really do want to build bridges with our educational partners so that we can answer questions like that.
Okay, back to the concern that getting rid of the test will lower the professional standard. Do you have evidence that removing the test will lower the standard?
I don't have evidence. I have concerns about the constellation of things that contribute to, again, and I'm empathizing with the public, I'm empathizing with the families and the communities who need to know what they're getting, and they are not going to necessarily know these various types of licensure. We as regulators need to be able to say to the public, when we give this license, we have gone through these various steps so that when you get someone who is called a social worker, you have some assurance of what that person has been through and what they have needed.
Thank you. I'm over time, but will there be another round on this panel? No. Okay, let me be very brief and thank the chair for the indulgence. The 2022 report on bias, does ASWB accept that there is racial bias, whether intended or not, in the exam?
Anything involving human beings is imperfect, but the anti-bias steps that you have to go through for a licensure exam, you will not find those steps anywhere in terms of the training of the people who write the items, how the items are continuously monitored, both statistically and by consultants, how items are taken out. You don't see that being done in any other space except for regulation. So everything has bias in it. However, I would challenge anybody to present to me things that go through the various steps for anti-bias and fairness that licensure exams must do because of their standards. And I think that is a meaningful contribution to regulatory decisions.
All right, bias is everywhere. The pass rates for first-time test takers in DC, 93% for white test takers, 52% for Black test takers. That's not a little bit of bias, that's a lot. So, you know, like fact, there's a lot of bias in this exam.
And let me just say in the outcomes, I do not believe the exam is the cause. People are bringing a lot into the exam experience, and they are not coming to that exam experience with a level playing field. We know that people are being told that people like them cannot pass the exam. We need to spend more time talking to some of the people who have passed the exam. What did they have? What are the factors that mitigated some of the things that are systemic that impact those outcomes? So the outcomes, I think, are reflective of these larger societal issues. And I think we need to ask some more questions there. One of the things that I think is super important is that we work together across the profession to address those. But the notion that this bias is starting at the time that someone has gone through their lives in our society, gone through school, and then suddenly from a level playing field, it shows up in the exam, it's reflective of a lot of factors, and we want to help support at least educators in mitigating some of those factors.
All right, well, let me wrap up and thank you. I agree that the bias doesn't start there, but I do think it's clear that the exam perpetuates the bias. And so I think we have to take it seriously. I want to thank the chair for indulgence and thanks so much this panel.
Thank you so much to this panel of witnesses and for being here today and for your testimony. Adam, I just want to mention, I did catch to the end of your comment about, oh, we could just pass this on emergency and then all of these folks would be able to start in November. That's ambitious and unlikely because these individuals would still have to actually submit the rest of their packets to go through the process of licensure, which obviously would take some time. But thank you again. Oh, Michelle, yes?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much again for being here. And again, if we don't have your written testimony, please make sure you provide that for the record. Ms. Hardy-Chandler, it would be great to get some more specific information about what's happening in terms of individuals who are taking the exam here in DC.
Absolutely. We'll follow up with that.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So as I telegraphed earlier, the committee is going to take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we'll have Aisha Nixon, who's the Associate Director of the Office of Professional Licensing Boards at DC Health, Ms. Velva Spriggs, who is the chair of the Board of Social Work, is also here as well. So we'll put 10 minutes on the clock and we will see you shortly. Thank you. All right, we are back. Before we get started, I have to swear you all in. So give me a minute. Let me just find it. Okay. So I will ask that you, Ms. Nixon, and anyone who may speak today swear under oath to ensure the testimony is accurate, etc. So I'll give it a minute. Wonderful. Okay. So if everyone could just raise their right hands. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Great. All right. Ms. Nixon, when you're ready to begin.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Henderson, council members, and staff of the Committee on Health. My name is Aisha Nixon, and I am the Associate Director for the Office of Health Professional Licensing Boards within DC Health's Health Regulation and Licensing Administration, known as HRLA. On behalf of Dr. Ayanna Bennett, Acting Director of DC Health, I am pleased to offer testimony on the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. DC Health strongly supports the intent of this legislation to expand the social work workforce and to prevent racial disparities in licensure. However, we are concerned that the bill as written will not address the underlying challenges for the workforce and may instead exacerbate existing challenges without addressing the reasons for the racial disparities in testing. In the District of Columbia, social workers play a critical role in supporting individuals and communities in need. We currently have a dedicated social work workforce comprised of 44 licensed social work associates, LSWAs, 1,333 licensed graduate social workers, LGSWs, 37 licensed independent social workers, LISWs, and 4,336 licensed independent clinical social workers, LICSWs, all contributing to the overall well-being of our residents. They work in hospitals, clinics, schools, community organizations, and as independent practitioners, reflecting the diverse needs of their clients. Social workers assume many roles in addressing health-related social needs, and they are an essential link that bring together services and support systems, enabling communities to thrive. Social workers are critical members of the healthcare team, addressing not only the emotional and social aspect of health, but also acting as advocates, behavioral health providers, and community resources. Just as we expect physicians and other members of the healthcare team to undergo rigorous training and testing requirements to become licensed, social workers must also meet a recognized standard to ensure the safety and quality of the care they provide. The impact of social workers extend beyond immediate clinical interventions, as they are a catalyst for improving various indicators of health and social well-being, and ensuring that their clients' needs are met in order to live healthy and productive lives. The Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023 seeks to remove racial disparities in licensing processing by eliminating the test requirements for LGSWs and LSWAs. This testing requirement uses the only nationally accepted test for social workers created by the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB. This test has been in place since 1983 and is taken by tens of thousands of applicants per year. The test, however, has also had significant racial disparities in pass rates for years, leading to the call for reform. As an agency rooted in equity, DC Health takes these disparities seriously and appreciates ASWB's release of detailed data to show the scope of the problem. DC Health is also encouraged that ASWB is committed to revamping their competency measure through community conversations and research. DC Health continues to advocate for ASWB to release a revised assessment as soon as possible that eliminates all racial disparities in pass rates. However, this legislation does not replace the test requirement. The current requirement of the ASWB exam is not merely a formality nor intentionally burdensome for applicants. Rather, it stands as a safeguard to ensure that social workers are equipped with the essential skills and comprehensive knowledge required to address the complex challenges faced by their clients. The challenge to the council is to create or identify an alternative competency-based assessment free of racial bias before eliminating the current exam. Absent that replacement, DC Health believes keeping the test while creating a task force to study exam alternatives, as the bill does for the independent practitioner licenses, would be a better approach. DC Health has identified the scarcity of adequate supervision for social workers to be a more significant challenge impacting the social work profession. This supervision is provided by professionals with the more advanced form of licensure. This legislation could exacerbate this situation by increasing the number of social workers who must work under supervision, LGSWs and LSWAs, as compared to those who can supervise, the LISWs or the LICSWs. As only the latter can supervise the former, the influx of new social workers would require supervision could overwhelm the number of available and willing supervisors. This amplifies the existing concerns regarding the limited availability of supervision, which is required for both the professional growth of social workers and ensures quality care is provided to clients. We believe that there are parallel strategies that the council can support as we await the updated exam that hopefully will have eliminated the racial bias in passing rates. Establishing a task force to explore alternatives to the licensing exam as proposed by the legislation could offer a balanced approach. Collaborating with experts, educators, and practitioners would ensure that any resulting changes align with the profession's core principles while sufficiently addressing concerns about bias and ensuring that new social work professionals are adequately prepared and feel confident, knowledgeable, and supported as they embark on their chosen profession. Looking to other jurisdictions such as Illinois which proposes additional clinical supervision hours for those who fail the licensing exam, may also offer an alternative that maintains a focus on competency while providing a pathway for licensure that does not rely on an exam. Additionally, this task force could examine the existing strains on the supervision system and make recommendations to support the existing workforce and widen the pipeline for future licensees. Such recommendations include the creation of new pathways and licensure for entry-level case managers that could support the workforce needs of our sister agencies and behavioral health partners, including the Department of Behavioral Health. These entry-level positions would widen the social work pipeline and could eventually move into roles as licensed independent or clinical social workers. In summary, DC Health appreciates the legislation's intent to reduce racial disparities in the healthcare workforce. However, we are in opposition to the legislation as written and strongly urge the council to begin with a task force that can examine alternatives to the exam that will still involve competency assessments, as well as the other stressors on the social work workforce, such as lack of supervision opportunities. Thank you for providing me with the opportunity to testify, and I am available to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Nixon. And again, thank you to all of you for being here. For those who've been watching, you can't see, but the team from DC Health has been here for the entire hearing, listening to the public witness testimony that has been provided. I want to start, I know that you provided some information, some data in terms of how many individuals are currently licensed for the 4 licensure categories. But I'm curious, when is the last time you all have done sort of a census, if you will, to look at, number one, how many of these individuals are falling in a particular gender category, a particular racial category, and then also to the question I had earlier of there individuals who could be licensed, but not actually practicing in a scope of practice that one would consider social work?
Great question. So most recently, the Board of Social Work underwent their renewal season, which ended on July 31st. We're just approaching the end of the grace period.
Okay.
And so within this renewal period, we did initiate or implement a workforce survey.
Okay.
And so our goal is that we will be able to analyze the data related to where individuals are currently serving. We had questions included regarding burnout and again, what areas that they are providing services if they are indeed working in the district,
Okay.
given the fact that they have a license.
Are you going to be able to make that available to the committee?
Yes, I'm sure that's information that we will be able to provide to the committee.
Okay. All right. We'll add that to our list of reports, Carl. Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of information that we have discussed today, all pertaining to the exam. So if we go back, they said the exam began in 1983. Obviously, Ms. Chandler provided some information in terms of that. But my understanding is that that's not the only exam that could exist out there. At any point, has DC examined these other alternative exam options, or are we only ever going with ASWB?
So typically the way the regulations are written, they will outline a specific organization or group that we would accept the exam from.
Okay.
Or its successor. I don't think in the past or since my tenure that we've been approached by any other test providers for this specific exam type. I don't think that it's something that's not that's off the table. I think if it is introduced and there is a sound, I guess, testing of that exam, it shows that it's reliable, it's valid, I think the board would consider it. But since my tenure, I'm not sure if Ms. Briggs, in her time in the district, has if we've been approached, but to my knowledge, we have not been
Okay.
approached by another.
I think someone said, you know, California tried to do their own exam. It was offered in a.
So for other professions, not the Board of Social Work, prior to a lot of different national exams. So I can give the example for physical therapy. The
Okay.
district had a physical therapy exam.
That was
they
ours.
Yes.
Okay.
And all different jurisdictions had it, and they had different pass rates. And then the Federation for State Physical Therapy Boards developed a national physical therapy exam that all states accepted. So it varies based on professions. Some professions started off with state-based exams, and now most have moved to national exams.
Okay. In terms of, obviously we have other occupational licenses outside of DC Health, but let's just talk about what you know in terms of DC Health. Are there any licensures that individuals can receive without an exam?
So currently, the license types that we have that they can practice without a national exam is the psychology associate.
Okay.
And I think that's the only one that I can think of all of our surgical assistants do have, there are multiple pathways for them to become licensed. So if they were in the military and they accumulated the experience during that time, so that's another license type that they can have the national exam. Oh, and then the speech language pathologist, the assistant, and the audiology assistant. There is not an exam required to get the license.
Okay. So all of the licensure types that you mentioned are assistant level, meaning
They
you would
require
be,
supervision.
they would require supervision.
Yes.
So how would this be different? Because my understanding is that if you are a, Y'all know they gave me a cheat sheet on these acronyms.
CSW or the LG.
If you're a LSWA or LGSW, you still have to be supervised, even though you're licensed.
Yes, so it wouldn't change the supervision requirements. And I think that's one of the things that we were trying to stress in our testimony. I think it would just increase the burden on the advanced licensure tier. So the LICSWs, I think when you think about independent clinical social workers, think about like nurses and the fact that they supervise a lot of nurse assisted personnel or non-licensed individuals. And so that just increases their workload. And again, the complexity of the different things the individuals do. I think also the difference comes into play with their the ability. So again, being able to diagnose.
That's what I was going to ask. I feel like somebody said earlier that at these two levels, you still can't diagnose. So while they may be able to do certain things from a casework,
to provide the treatment, which is what all of the other assisted personnel for the other boards, the audiologist is who's going to do the assessment, right?
Right.
And then they will develop the treatment plan. And then they may have the audiology assistant carry out the treatment plan, but they still insert themselves maybe every 4 visits or whatever the case may be,
right?
To reassess.
Okay. And now, all of our boards are volunteers. We love our members of our boards. More people out there, if you want to serve on your professional licensing board, please come to the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments. We would love to have you. I say all that. And I also know too, from having hearings with you all in terms of the time that it takes in the review process, does removing the exam add to the workload of the staff who assist the Board of Social Work?
I think that eventually the removal of the exam will increase the workload, but I think it's in a different way. I think that the board, again, based on the recommendations of the task force, would have to come up with a more structured review of supervisors.
Because I had that question earlier of who audits the supervisor to make sure that the supervisor is doing what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
I imagine though, I mean, you all don't just do licensure, Ms. Spriggs, right? You also handle complaints and discipline as well. Do we get complaints about supervision?
We do.
Do you want to?
And we get complaints about social work practitioners as well. So that is something that concerns me greatly, that in the absence of an exam, which is geared to at least identify standards for practice, for entry-level practice, that in the absence of the exam, then how do you determine who is doing what out there? We have gotten some rather horrendous cases involving social workers who are not good practitioners. And I'm not simply talking about skill, I'm talking about ethics. I'm talking about, even in some instances, criminal behavior. So we need to have a way to measure that. We recognize that, that there are biases. In fact, when I attend the ASBW meeting. What is it?
The ASWB.
Thank you. I get it confused.
It's a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, you know, it's the National Board of Black Social Workers, and then anyway. When I attend the Association of Social Work Boards, I always bring up the question about biases. So I want to assure you that we too are very concerned about disparities. We are concerned about biases in the exam, but we are not wanting to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because, you know, even in those states where they have eliminated the exam, the jury is still out with regard to what the impact is, what the implications are. And I would not like to see us jump immediately into the recommendations that are being made about getting rid of the exam without having an opportunity to fully examine and try to anticipate what the consequences will be. I must say that I don't think that's a direct answer to your question, but I wanted to be able to say that.
No, I appreciate that. And I'll have some further questions, but I'm over my time. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairperson Henderson. Thank you very much to our government witnesses. I do appreciate you being with us today. In this hearing, we have heard from many social workers, from state legislators from multiple states, from social worker professors, and from organization directors supporting this bill. Some of the arguments that they've laid out are the lack of evidence of a measure of proficiency from this exam, bias in the exam, which affects the test taker, the effect that bias in the exam has on the general public by limiting people of color and people with shared experiences. We heard from people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And we've learned that in at least one state that got rid of the exam, there have been 0 complaints about quality of service or competence. And we've learned that even without the exam, there's a very high bar to become a social worker, including years of school at an accredited program, hundreds of hours of training, and ongoing supervision. We've not heard any evidence that the exam actually measures competence. And Ms. Briggs, to your point, people who have taken and passed the exam are engaging in the type of behavior that no one wants in their profession. The exam didn't prohibit it. And we have not heard any dispute of the bias or the resulting impact on diversity in the field. So I'm trying to get to understanding why holding on to this exam is so important. Ms. Nixon, what evidence? So we have 2 issues. One is the effectiveness of the exam itself. Does it actually uphold this professional standard? Second issue is bias. These are, in my view, 2 separate issues. On the first issue of effectiveness of the exam, Ms. Nixon, what evidence has been provided to the DC Board of Social Work or DC Department of Health that these exams are correlated with safe and competent social work practice?
So I don't think there's been evidence that's been provided in the sense that you speak of. I think that the development of all of the national exams are done by the actual practitioners themselves within the field. And I think that the boards who are entrusted with the public safety and ensuring that individuals have the minimum competencies required to enter into the field take in regard that their colleagues are the ones developing the exams and developing the exam questions that are being given. So is there actual data and evidence? No, but I think that's one of the things that most boards take into account when developing the minimum competencies, which is their primary charge as a regulatory board. They look at it as it's not Aisha Nixon, who is not a social worker, developing the test exam, right? It's Aisha Nixon, a licensed social worker who's gone through all of the things that every social worker who's coming to take the exam has gone through. She's the one developing the questions. And I think that's what most of the boards and what DC Health has taken into consideration when drafting regulations and looking at the requirements for licensure.
So, I mean, in addition to there not being evidence, though, we heard from a lot of social workers today who don't believe that this exam meets the stated goal. And no one throughout this entire hearing could explain how it is predictive, how it is correlated, what data exists, how we second guess the exam to ensure that it is actually accomplishing what it's intended to accomplish. And I think we have to be skeptical of that. In addition to, well, there currently are many social workers practicing in the district, even at the clinical level, which is beyond the scope of the exams we're talking about eliminating with this bill, who were exempted or grandfathered from taking the exam. Do you have any concerns about their ability to practice safe and competent social work, given that they never passed a licensing exam?
No, we don't have any concerns of the individuals who were grandfathered in. Again, if individuals who are grandfathered in come before us as it relates to a complaint, then we would address it. But no, there's no concerns.
Have you, please?
I am one of those people who was grandfathered in. And I think that I would certainly, I would certainly be held to the same regulatory standards that any other person who is practicing social work in the District of Columbia. If I were not held to those standards and it became evident that I were not performing appropriately, that could come to the attention of the board, and that I would then have to be dealt with in the same way as all other social workers would be dealt with. We do have ethics, we have principles by which we must operate. We have standards according to our social work ethics. So it isn't as if we are devoid of all of what is required to be a professional in the field.
Right. And that's sort of my point, is that there are so many other things, standards and ongoing, ethical standards, supervision, that don't end with an exam. But this exam by itself, while woman from ASWB, yes, I apologize that I forgot her name, mentioned that the exam is only one part of an assessment
That's
tool.
right.
It is the prohibitive part, because if you receive, when you get an application for licensure, what do you look at when you get that application to determine whether or not you are going to give a license to that applicant?
So as you just stated, there's a number of tools that the board utilizes to make decisions regarding if a license is granted. That includes graduating from an accredited program, depending on the level of licensure that they're applying for, the completion of postgraduate experience, or an internship under the accredited program, a criminal background check, character references for some of our programs or some of our license types, and then of course the national exam.
And so with, let's say, the education aspect, they pass an accredited program, let's say they got B's in every course and pass the exam, my guess is they probably would get a license. They got A's in every course, came 3 points shy of passing the exam, my guess is that they wouldn't get a license. So the test, whether we intend it to be or not, is a hard barrier that doesn't offer sort of flexibility, context, or anything else. It is by itself a barrier, different than the other, than the education and the ongoing requirements. Have you seen evidence that states that eliminated the LGSW level exam have had unfavorable results, like increased complaints to their state boards, or any other concerns?
No, we have not. I think again, it's kind of premature since it's 2021, it's 2023, and we are also emerging out of post-COVID. I think it still takes time I think even COVID, we won't know what the effects are for quite a few years. Again, when you think about social workers, they are working with the most vulnerable population. So is someone who is homeless and working with a social worker going to have and know the ability that they have the ability to submit a complaint? Or is it maybe when they interact with someone else that they know that they have the ability to submit a complaint? So we have to think about that too. It's thinking about the population in which these individuals work with, and the actual public or the consumers, that they know that the resources that they have at hand. So I think to say that there is no data, because I think it's too soon. We won't know.
Okay. I mean, we heard from Illinois though that there've been 0 complaints. So that's some data. You know, it's not 10 years of data, but it is some data. And they have had a significant influx of social workers. Do you, Ms. Nixon, do you accept that there is racial bias in the exam?
Yes, the District of Columbia, DC Health, the Board of Social Work, we do acknowledge that the data shows that there is racial disparities within the social work exam.
So how then does DC Department of Health justify utilizing an exam known to be racially biased as an appropriate and acceptable measure of professional competence?
I think that, I don't know if there's a justification. I think it goes back again to what I stated previously, whereas when the board, their charge is to the protection of the public to determine minimum competencies for individuals to become licensed in said profession, they look at the individuals who are creating the exam, and they trust the individuals that are creating the exam. I think DC Health, with this current legislation, we do support the intent of the legislation, but we want to have a balanced approach. We don't want to just throw out the exam. We want to have the task force so that we can look at all of the alternatives that are possibly available to us, while still keeping with the standards that have been in place, and kind of going from there.
I would say this in wrapping up this round, if we believe that bias is the only issue and that it can be fixed, then we set out to fix the bias. Testimony from ASWB, I take it to say bias is everywhere and you're not going to fix the bias. So if there is bias in the exam, if we cannot get rid of the bias in the exam, then we have to have some strong correlation between passing the exam and competency, and we don't have that either. So I'm saying we're coming up really short on a justification for this exam, and I think we need to be knowledgeable. Thank you, Chairperson Henderson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say something.
Oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Ms. Briggs.
there are a couple of things I want to say that I think this is a work in process or progress. This business of getting rid of bias. Yes, it is true that bias permeates a racist society. America is a racist society, so we will find biases everywhere. And even if we were to discard the exam and come up with an alternative, we still have to be concerned about whether there is even bias in that particular process. I feel that we have confronted ASWB about this issue of bias. I don't feel that they have always effectively responded. However, under the new leadership, it does seem to me that they are making very serious efforts to address this problem. Of course, it's in their interest to do so as an institution. But beyond that, we are all very concerned that we eliminate these disparities, not only in the practice of social work, but also in the service delivery aspect of this. Now, there's another element that I want to add, and that is that by eliminating one monster, we don't want to create a new monster. And that is this workforce issue that was either stated or alluded to in the testimonies of a number of people who spoke today. I am concerned that if there is no way to standardize or to regulate the practice of the LSWA and the the two categories, the LSG, the LGSW, but we are licensing the clinical social worker, that we will perhaps create a new hierarchy of workers so that all of those who are concerned about those social workers who are not passing the exam, but who can now be licensed, may get locked into this area of those who are not clinical social workers. And then will they be promoted? Will they be paid at the same level? Will they have an opportunity to grow in the same way that as those who are licensed? That is another consideration, or at least one of the implications that I am concerned about with this question of dropping the license. I think that we need not be so ready to do this without some deliberate analytical planning, thinking about how to do it. Because at the end of all of this are these vulnerable populations we talked about today. I didn't hear many people talk about the populations. In fact, I wish we had some clients here today to talk about how they experience social workers who are licensed or not licensed. That's really important. We need to see the other end of this. I recognize that those who are running agencies need to expand their pool of workers so that they can fully address the need. And that is the context in which they brought forward their issue. But I am also concerned about people getting, speaking of disparities and discrimination, getting these Black social workers locked into a space where they cannot move ahead.
I think, and I'll start my round now, Boyd. I think you raise a very interesting point, Ms. Spriggs, and I think Commissioner Doyle, who spoke on the first panel, was talking a little bit about this too. And it's something I'm concerned about as well. If I think about, so if we were to pass the bill as written, we get rid of the exam for the 2 bottom levels, but for the 2 other levels, we keep the exam. That would essentially mean that you can never become a supervisor unless you can pass the exam. So does that create an environment where we have all of the rank and file, if you will, who are Black, people of color, et cetera, and then you have all of the supervisors who are white who could pass the exam? What kind of environment does that create? And I think that's a little bit what she was talking about from the organizational perspective. And so one of the other things that I had a question too around was for our region, when I think about reciprocity and moving back and forth, and everybody wants a compact out the wazoo. How does this, if we move alone and our other neighboring jurisdictions don't move, how does that impact the conversations that we've been having? I was looking at the board minutes, Ms. Spriggs, and it said that the board minutes from June, that the board was supposed to decide in July if you wanted to establish any reciprocity pathways with any other of the neighboring jurisdictions. What happened with that? I'd imagine we would want to. Okay.
The board did vote to.
Oh, can you just introduce yourself further?
Latrice Herndon, I'm executive director for the Board of Social Work and 6 other allied and behavioral health boards.
Okay, good.
So the board did decide to move forward with discussions with our neighboring jurisdictions. So that's what we're in the process of now. But one of the other things they did discuss was looking at our endorsement pathway to see if we could facilitate a faster route to licensure that way as well. Endorsement being that they already have a license in another jurisdiction and that they're coming to the district and not having to, clearly they would have already passed an exam, but they would come to the district and do the paperwork process necessary and then receive their license that way.
Do you feel, and I know that you can't speak for the board, but maybe Ms. Spriggs, you can provide maybe some ideas in terms of the conversations you've been having with your fellow board members. Would the board give pause to the idea of the endorsement process or reciprocity if either Maryland or Virginia did not require the exam? Sorry if I'm. I know I'm asking a hypothetical, which
Yeah.
perhaps is unfair of me to be asking a
Yes.
hypothetical, but I think it's something that, I feel like sometimes in policy, we don't think 5 steps ahead. So
I would
I'm trying to
say-
think 5 steps ahead. If we
Yeah.
do this
Uh-huh.
and Maryland never gets it together and Virginia never decides to do it, then does the whole option break down?
So I would say that based on boards that already have existing like reciprocity agreements. So I'm going to use the Board of Medicine, for example, with the physicians. I think there would be pause on the department wanting to enter into agreement if that was the case. But I think also it just excludes individuals. So DC, Maryland, and Virginia for physicians have different residency requirements. And for their foreign trained or foreign educated physicians.
Mhm.
And so that option of the reciprocity is not offered to them
Oh,
in the district because we have a higher standard,
I see.
right? But they can, if a DC licensed foreign trained physician goes to Maryland or Virginia, well, specifically Virginia, they would be accepted. So again, I think it would just go into what agreements are determined by the boards collaboratively. But I think it does weigh, the decision to enter into an agreement when you have vastly different tracks.
Right.
Yeah,
I
that licensure.
I remember in a conversation I was having
Yeah,
with Dr.
substantial
Lewis, who is the former head of director of health, and she was explaining, compacts are not easy. And also going further to say, right, like, yes, even though we are neighboring jurisdictions, we all have various requirements, and entering into agreement means we're accepting what everybody else is doing. And sometimes some of that you might give a little pause. Like I think she said, Virginia didn't do background checks for Board of Medicine, which is strange to me, but nonetheless, that's the decision that they've made in the Commonwealth. And so how do we decide to make those determinations over here? Again, so we're talking about an exam here. You said almost everybody except for our techs, our assistants level requires an examination. And if I look at some of the pass rates on some of these others exams, I probably could find some of the same types of biases and differences.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So Ms. Nixon, is any, I haven't checked everybody's board minutes in a while, and I could sure do a roundup with my staff, but is any other board having a conversation of no longer requiring the examination for their particular licensure field?
No, this conversation has not come up with any of the other boards.
So why this one? Right? Because we could talk about nursing.
I know, and I think the question is I think this one, it's timing. I think it's the timing of the release of ASWB's report about the disparities.
Mhm.
I think it is the anxiety that's behind the workforce or lack thereof. But I think
I have a nursing shortage.
I know, but that's why I said I think the introduction of this for this profession you can utilize those things to say that's why it's being pushed. There is a nursing shortage, but I think this would open the floodgates for all professions to seek this route. I think it's just going to be it might take more time when it comes to the physical medicines, as I call them.
Right.
Nursing, physicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists, but I can see this opening up to professional counselors, everything that's behavioral health related. And I think
that makes me nervous.
Yes, and I think it is that also demonstrates these people are working with someone that their mental health is impacted, right? And I think that is that is just as important as someone's physical health,
Right. The idea that we would have a higher standard for
someone
you to be like a surgeon, but if you want to deal with my brain in terms of how I'm interacting.
I think how I respond or react to the issues or things in society, you would require someone with less.
Now, I say all that to say, I also do have great empathy and sympathy for some of the individuals today who share their stories around how many times they take the exam, fail by 1 point, fail by 2 point, fail by 3 point, right? And, you know, hearing those folks, especially is like, this is passion work, something that they want to do. They've gone to school, they've done the internship, and for whatever reason, and we can get into some of those around like not being able to pass the exam. It does give me a little like pause that we have no other way. Right. If I have taken this exam 5 times and I have failed every time, I'm in a margin of quote unquote error, you know, 2 points, 3 points, et cetera.
That's why we're in favor of the task force and to look at alternatives. But I think also bringing everyone to the table, because I think that's also the conversation. The first approach is to start with the licensing requirements, but what about the education? And I know everyone, yes, they're all accredited by one CMSW, one organization, but every program is different.
Yes, I've heard from some people, they said
their theories are different and how they teach is different. And, you know, the resources. So I think that's why I think we want to have the task force so that we can look at the different ways, because I do understand that. And we do have empathy for individuals that take the test repeatedly and are failing by 1 point or 2 points. But I think all parties involved need to be at the table. Like, what is it that Catholic is doing that they have a higher pass rate than Howard? What is it that George Mason is doing that they have a higher pass rate than every school in the District of Columbia? And they're right here. What's the difference? And kind of figuring out what the resources are. So again, we're not opposed to figuring out a way that these individuals can enter into the workforce and be able to provide competent, skilled care to those in need. We just want to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And you know, I went like down a rabbit hole looking at sort of pass rates on like nursing. I just wanted to see what's, you know, what it is. And while there might be some disparities in terms of the numbers, some of our HBCUs have the highest pass rates in the country. So something is happening in the program that is preparing individuals for that. And I think you make a really good point around George Mason versus, like, I'm not, yes, everybody's accredited. Not it. Okay.
I have taught in 3 social work schools, and I know that there are differences among the schools. Well-intended differences. They're good. People are encouraged to be creative and to really do the very best that they can possibly do in developing the courses and following the guidelines of the Council on Social Work Education. But because we're human beings, you know, there will be differences. So that's one factor. There are many factors, of course, but that's one.
Yeah, I'm over my time. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairperson Henderson. Thanks again to our government witnesses. Yeah, you know, I think this discussion around thinking ahead is important. Sometimes you do things with good intentions, to your point, Ms. Briggs, and then you get a couple steps down the road and realize you've created other problems. Few points I want to make here. One, I want to continue to bring us back to what I believe is the first principle, which is there is no clear correlation between competency in the field and this exam. And so as we have all these other discussions, I think we always have to come back to that point. There was an article in the Washington Post, August 31st, this year. The title is, "In a Crisis, Schools Are 100,000 Mental Health Staff Short. The demand for aid radically exceeds the supply of help. Providers are experimenting with how to address the emergency." Experimenting makes me nervous, all right? I don't think we have to experiment here because we are proposing something that is not novel in any way, that has sort of a track record, that has no complaints, that has a history. So rather than folks out here experimenting, we have a proposal looking us in the face that works and should be good for the people that we want to serve. Not exercising this option is causing some of the harms that we're discussing preventing now. We heard from nonprofits that are not hiring people who have social work degrees because they could be seen as practicing without a license if they haven't passed their exam. And so we have people who are probably more competent than the folks who are being hired who can't get hired. And that's causing some harm too. There's no outcome here that's perfect. And I think we accept that. And we're also grappling with a really difficult issue of compacts and reciprocity. And I think to be realistic there as well, and I can't remember who said it, if it's the chair or one of our government witnesses, that's not a clean process either. I'm a barred attorney. There is one state, Wisconsin, that allows you to practice law without passing the bar exam. There are 4 states that allow you to sit for the bar exam without going to law school. Some states have reciprocity, some have them with others, some have them with all. It's just a mixed bag. So I don't think there's an outcome as we think about, well, what's this going to mean for the future? It's going to cause confusion. I don't think there's a clean outcome anywhere. And so I want to make sure we also don't limit ourselves by thinking, oh, we won't fit into the box that gets created. I promise you it won't be a clean box. So, you know, as we, you know, if our hesitation for getting rid of the exam is even in part, well, how will this impact reciprocity? I'm not sure that's something we really have to worry about because it's not going to be clean anyway. If one of our concerns is, well, there may be people licensed and practicing who we're not completely sure have the full competency. There are people holding those positions now because organizations are not hiring people with social work degrees that haven't passed exams for fear of ethical issues. So these are some of the questions that we have to work through. But before I go into my last couple of questions, that was a long soliloquy. Any thoughts or concerns on those points?
I don't think it's either or, black or white. I think this is a very complex issue. And I would caution us to proceed with caution as we consider alternatives to what we have now. I really would, because as I think about it, if you have people practicing and who've not taken the exam, or we don't know what they're doing out there. And of course, in many instances, agencies have brought in people to perform social work related duties who are not trained in the field. That's one of the fallouts of the difficulties that we have. So we understand that, we recognize that. This is not new information, but it's because of those situations that we are saying that we must proceed with caution, regardless of what we end up doing.
I appreciate that. I fully agree. What I think is my last question. In your testimony, Ms. Nixon, you mentioned concerns about supervision and how this bill would put pressure on how many people would need to supervise incoming social workers. I want to clarify from my perspective, it sounds like you're saying that the district is using a test with proven bias as a barrier to manage supervision challenges. Can you elaborate on that?
I would disagree with that. I don't think that our ask of council to not eliminate the test while seeking alternatives is us stating why it's our alternative to the supervision issue. I think the supervision issue exists prior to, it exists while. It's great that I know that Illinois, the senator, I believe, or stated that they've had no issues with getting supervision or having supervisors. And I think several of the individuals that testified have said the challenges with supervision or getting people to supervise in the district. I think that's what we're looking at, like just the stress, and again, asking that the task force work on that too, or aid the board in coming up with a solution. And when you look at it, the board is currently looking at group supervision, right? What if they should have limits or requirements so that people are getting the most robust interaction with their supervisor. So what's the most? Do you know if as a group of 4 sufficient? Is a group of 6 too much? So again, the board is exploring all the different avenues and ways to improve and have individuals have the ability to get great supervision. One of the things that the board did during COVID was the development of their telesupervision policy, which they've kept in place post-COVID. So that's allowing individuals to receive supervision utilizing synchronous and asynchronous forms. Also, looking at individuals, we accept individuals who get supervisions from individuals from other jurisdictions who are licensed. We have the supervised practice form that allows individuals to work under supervision while they study for their exam. So I think there's a lot of things that the board is already doing and DC Health is doing. So I don't think that our ask today is to keep the exam so that we don't have to tackle the supervision problem. We're working on that. I think we're just asking that we create the task force so that we can look at all of the ways that we can possibly allow individuals to be licensed in the district and provide competent care to those in need.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the government witnesses and to all witnesses. Chairperson Henderson, thank you so much for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Just a couple of questions to sort of follow up. You know, I know there was some conversation mentioned about, and I appreciate both Senator Washington and Senator Vila from Illinois testifying today, some conversations around what's happening in Illinois. I understand that California has done something different. To what extent has DC Health reached out to the boards of social works in those jurisdictions to better understand how they came to these decisions? Or how it's going? I can accept anecdote, but
so we have touch bases. Again, we're just waiting to kind of get together to discuss further, but we have reached out. And so we're just awaiting responses back from the state of Illinois to find out how it's going.
Or even California too. I mean, I understand California at one point switched to an oral exam. And they're like, oh no, this is expensive. Also biased,
So that's the
subjective.
thing.
And then they went back and then they created their own test.
So with creating your own test, and I think that's why some of the boards historically have moved towards the acceptance of national exams, is that even the board issued tests still have to be tested, right? They have to go through their own rigors to ensure that they're valid, that they're reliable, that they don't have racial disparities. So even tests created by the jurisdiction still have to undergo some type of scrutiny. I think that's probably one of the parts. As far as the oral exam, I think if individuals would like to have the exam orally, I think they still have that opportunity, even with ASWB, through accommodations.
Not their thing, right? But if you give them a written, I give you a prompt and you tell me what you would do in these various scenarios, they would ace it, right? It is just, it's about different learning styles. And I recognize that when you do some of an open-ended test, a lot of friends who are teachers, right? It requires more work on the part of whoever is grading it. But at the same time, it does allow for people to show, oh no, I know how to do this. I know what the answer is. I just may not be able to pick 1 out of 5 because I don't know, I'm a Libra. So in any way I could sort of like, oh, it could be this in this situation, or it could be this in this situation, or it could be this in this situation, right? You go over and over and over. So I get it and I understand. And I can appreciate what you're saying in terms of like a desire to have a fuller conversation about what we decide and sort of how we move forward here. Just for information sake for the executive director, how many applications do we have pending right now of people who are not renewals, new?
Re-examinations.
Wait, what's the difference between a
There's
okay.
the individuals who, so if there's initial licensure.
Yep.
That means they have never sat for the exam as of yet.
Okay.
And then there's re-examination. So these are individuals who have taken the exam, failed, and now are reapplying to get permission to sit again.
Okay. So how many are in the first group? The brand news.
Do not.
I
have
think
the
we would have to
current-
get that
Yeah, I'll have to
information
pull
for
that to
you,
see
like how
many
many are
are currently
pending.
Yeah. I would like to know how many are pending and how many re-examinations.
We do have the re-examination.
Re-examinations was like
90.
498-ish
Oh, hundreds.
for re-examination.
Yes.
Yes, but it's at the various levels. So some are LSCSWs, some are the latter two tiers. So it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
And this is over, so the total number of the 490, because I asked this, because I kind of figured that was gonna come up, should have asked for the pending numbers, right? It was at 490 something, and this is over the last 3 or 4
Yeah,
years.
since 20.
So I wanted to know how many.
Oh,
people
this
have-
is not this calendar year.
No.
Okay, this
I wanted-
this is important because I was like, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah,
That's a lot of people for a
I wanted to
year.
know how many people have submitted an application for re-examination, right? And so since 2020, we've had a total of about 498 applications that have been submitted
Okay.
for re-examination. Of those, 69 were closed because they did not take the test. I think it's about 224 that did not pass the test the second time and their application was closed.
Okay. All right. I'm doing some like rough math. Okay. So you said, did you say 69 or 29?
69.
69
applications were
just,
closed.
they didn't take the exam,
didn't-
even though they submitted their stuff and they just decided, okay, that's not I'm not doing that today. Okay, great. And then of those
224 of those applications were closed, right, total. Of the 224 that were closed, 69 were closed due to failing the exam. So I have to correct myself.
okay. Did you get that?
And the total number of applications through to August 15th, that's when we asked, the last report was run, it was 483 total. So from the 483, 224 applications were closed. Of the 224, 69 based on failure of the exam.
Okay. But the exam is not the only way that someone wouldn't be licensed, right?
So yes, there are other ways.
So
that you
they're
would not-
in that 200, or I'm sorry.
in the 224.
So the 224. So I got 69 people who didn't take the exam. So I had to like,
So that took it and failed. So
wait.
the remaining, yes, so that's why I had to correct myself.
Okay, say that one more. So say it.
224.
Nope, start at the beginning. We
So
had
the
498 over.
483 re-examination applications were submitted through August 15th of 2023. Since
From
2020.
2020. Okay, keep going.
Of those, 224 were closed.
Okay,
Of the 224, 69 were closed due to failure of the exam.
okay.
So the remaining were closed based on other issues. It could be that, depending on the level, again, you need supervisory hours to submit. They may not have been able to get their hours accounted for. They may have had other issues that would prohibit their license from moving forward.
So am I to assume that everyone else who was not in the closed went on to full licensure?
To gaining their license, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I pulled out a calculator because, why not? Okay. All right. Okay. I would love to know how many are pending right now. And then of course, once you all get that, dig through, collate all of the particular survey information, I think that would be helpful as well to this conversation. Because I feel like in some ways we're having a conversation about this in a vacuum. In the same, I was talking to the nurses union earlier this week, and they contend it's not a nurse shortage, it's a shortage of nurses willing to work in certain environments.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh.
So that's why I said, I think the workforce survey that was implemented, we've implemented it in all of our renewals. So I think we have 4 more left for this calendar year. So part of it was about burnout, just to see what is making people transition to other, either transition out of the profession. Is it retirement? Is it burnout? Kind of looking at what it is. And like you said, there are a lot of social workers who are not engaged in the practice of social work.
Right. Okay. Do you have any other further questions? Okay. So, so just from a follow-up, I'm wrapping up here. I'm done. I have a request out to the Association of Social Work Boards about their data specifically as it relates to DC, broken out by race and gender, et cetera. I have a request out to you guys about some of the information in terms of your workforce piece, and then also how many applications that you currently have pending at each of the levels. And then when you all hear back from the other jurisdictions around what's going on there, and I'll be honest with you, I probably will have my staff also reach out to, just to, we like to, I'm okay with DC being a pioneer on some things, but I just want to make sure that we have the full information around what the unintended consequences could be or not be of our particular action. And so once we get all of that together, then we can have some further conversations about how we move forward with Councilmember White as well as with DC Health and the executive on this. I want to express my gratitude to all of the witnesses who testified today. I think that this hearing was a very valuable insight into the proposed legislation. And there's evidence that there's definitely valid concerns on both sides regarding exemption of the associate and graduate social workers from the licensure exams. Of course, supporters believe that this will enhance accessibility and diversity in the profession, which I value deeply. But I also hear the concerns that opponents have raised around maintaining rigorous standards for the scope of practice in the profession of social work. I appreciate the thoughtful testimony from our witnesses today, and as well as from the public. And the Committee on Health definitely remains committed to addressing these complex issues around addressing some of these very real needs of our DC residents who are in need of services that these health professionals provide. For anyone who was not able to speak or attend today's hearing, we will accept public testimony until Thursday, October 5th at 5 p.m. We now have a new system to submit testimony at the council. So you may submit your testimony online by clicking today's hearing at dccouncil.gov/hearings, and you can just upload right into the system. If for whatever reason you want to call us still and leave a voicemail, that is an option that is available to you. You can give us a call at 202-430-6046. Again, 202-430-6046. If you leave a voicemail, please remember to speak slowly and to spell your first and last name for the record. The next meeting of the Committee on Health will be on September 25th at 11:30 on nominations for the Board of Physical Therapy, the Board of Occupational Therapy, and the Board of Medicine. Again, my one little plug to any of the professionals out there who are licensed and watching, and you want to serve the District of Columbia and your fellow professions, I don't know, your fellow people, colleagues. Thank you, your colleagues. we still have vacancies on some of our boards. And so we need you. Counseling being one of them. There being no further business before the committee at this time. The time is 3:19 and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you guys so much. And yeah.